Okay, dear colleagues, we begin our panel at COP27, and the name of the panel, Green and Resilient Recovery for Further Development. The panel is organized by UNDP Ukraine. First of all, we are happy that this year we have so nice Ukrainian pavilion at COP first time ever. And we are really proud that UNDP provided significant support to be able to hold this and organize this great pavilion. Also, we are proud that during this wartime, UNDP increased even its presence in Ukraine. We are based in Kiev, in other regions of Ukraine, and increase actually our support. And this support includes both emergency response and development. Emergency response is so important, and even yesterday, if a case when Russia made massive attack on energy infrastructure in the country proved that, and this support is so important. At the same time, we believe that development and reconstruction is also needed very much to make the country, Ukraine, sustainable. And this reconstruction and this recovery should be made in a modern way. It should be green. And that's why actually we hold this our panel today to discuss about the possibility and priorities for this time, for wartime. What should be done perhaps first, what can be done a bit later. That's about this reconstruction. And let me introduce our panelists, and we have both online and offline. First of all, I would like to introduce my colleague Alexander Sushenko, Head of Energy and Environment Portfolio, the UNDP. Also, let me, we have Raymond Schwarze, Center for Environment Research. Also, we have Richard Klein, the Stockholm Environment Institute. We have Olena Lenska, Head of Renewable Energy Development Department, State Agency of Energy Efficiency and Energy Saving. She's online. Olena, welcome. We also have Viktor Smal, Deputy Head of State Forestry Agency of Ukraine. We have with us today Yulia Bereshchenko, Director of Sustainable Business Development at Astart Agro Holding. Also, I cannot see who is online. Oh, we have also Jan Clark, European Commission Joint Research Center, Belgium, and Andriy Bremizov, the Head of Entrepreneurship and Export Promotion Office of Ukraine is good. Oh, he is here. Andriy, very good that you were able to join, because our colleagues from Ukraine may have not a stable connection, and so maybe we will try to give them speak a bit even earlier than we planned. Dear colleagues, so I think once again, let's talk about two things basically, about recovery and reconstruction in the country, what should be done and what the priorities are. And also we are going to share some initiatives already undertaken, including with UNDP support in the country. That's, I think, will be very interesting. So let's begin with please, Raymond, please, with you.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you very much for your kind introduction.
Свет за очи, Жень.
Can you hear me? So we have some audience from outside listening through Zoom. Yeah, quite some. And let's say, sorry, this doesn't work. Yeah, I just put it straight before my mouse. Yeah, thank you very much for coming, all of you. I should say I'm working with Alexander or Dr. Suschenko since almost 7 years now. And we initially were working within a framework of UNDRR, the Disaster Risk Reduction Unit of UN. And what I'm going to present is a tender that we were doing very early in 2020. And if you go back in your memory and think about the beginning of 2020, the largest concern was obviously COVID, where the pandemic hit Europe. And it is about the response of Europe on the COVID pandemic in terms of recovery, the ways it's going to be monitored, and a kind of an evaluation about the successfulness of it. I think it could be a model for what is to come in Ukraine in reconstruction. And it's also quite relevant to see this program is a 7 years program. And let's be optimistic in this morning. It could be that Ukraine is a member of the EU within 7 years, and the program is going to continue. So please allow us to look into what we find, just briefly to give some ideas how Europe is ticking, so to speak, in terms of recovery finance. You all remember this moment, or most of you may remember this moment in July 2020, where the European Council, so the member states, the 27 member states representatives to the EU and the European Commission agreed on a very large recovery program, 750 billion added to a trillion for the Green Deal. So this is two large efforts in Europe that will change the future of Europe in the very long run. That's why it's called Next Generation. So it's sort of looking into the future of Europe of the generation to come with that funding and the fund, how it is spent. I may ask for the next slide if I could. I cannot change. Well, it's very, in some way, it's just to inform what is the recovery program in Europe as it stands, as it's going, and looking into how it achieved towards its goals. And I will emphasize from the very beginning, it's about green and resilient recovery. So it's not essentially green. We are at the climate conference, so greenness will play a role, but it's on much more. It's on digitalization, on equity and participation of the most vulnerable in a situation where a country is recovering from a crisis. I will slightly go beyond in what we, Alexander and I, had been doing by also comparing the different methodologies to some extent, how it is monitored. And of course, conclude to open some hopefully lively debate in this group. Please, next slide. Well, this is simply the share, as you see, what I just mentioned. Nothing new for you. It's a 7 years program, as I said, for spending in the EU, 750 billion in terms of US billions, to just going into what will be the future of the younger generation to come. And it's half-half, as you see, financed by public funding upfront, but some additional funding in terms of private funding is planned for under the, let's say, the shield that the very good credit rating of the EU will get in terms of loans that are taken out from the EU. So some private element into the recovery is probably the larger message from here that needs to be considered also for the Ukraine when it comes to the recovery. Next slide, please. Shorten it up. Essentially, I wanted to talk a little about what are the key goals of how the young generation in Europe is to live. If it would be animated, you could see it's a set of goals. I will take up just the overarching, the headers of this program. Of course, it is green transition under the Green Deal. So everything must be conforming to the goals of the Green Deal. But it's also about digitalization as a necessary response to COVID. We all know how dependent we became to the digital tools of life under the COVID period and the lockdowns. So we need some additional effort to move towards digital transformation. But it's more than this. It's the idea that growth can be sustained in Europe over the longer period, but it should be smart, sustainable, and inclusive. For many European countries, there's a divide that has grown over a long period of time and accelerated under COVID between rural and urban areas. So social and territorial cohesion is something that the younger generation are really in need of, because the disparities between rural and urban development has grown and it has accelerated, as I said, through COVID. Health, of course, public health in particular, is an issue of the future after the pandemic. It may not have been the last, to just remember. And in general, it's a policy for dealing with the needs of the next generation. That's why it's called Next Generation EU or NGEU. I wouldn't go in all the details. It's as I couldn't, but it's simply to acknowledge two of these overarching goals has been quantified. So every spending under this program that goes into green transition or that is done under these programs has to go to at least 37% in terms of into green transition, and to 20% into digital transformation. So very clear, quantified goals that can be monitored. Oh, next slide, please. If we dealt a little with methodologies, and it's simply something that is to be understood, if you compare different results of evaluations of programs, that we have actually at least 2 layers, but in some sense 3 layers to consider. Well, the first is rescue. You may remember the very first thing that happened after the pandemic arrived in Europe was that the big national banks spent billions. Here I put on the number of Germany in just reviving the economy. Everything came to a complete shutdown, but the economy has to go on. So a lot of money was simply spent to make the economy going on while nothing could go on. So that for instance included government's subsidies to companies, for example, aviation, that were shut off from their operations. And so some big spending went into just keeping the economy go with the pandemic existent. And it was a very large part. It's essentially the first step that you will see in every recovery program. But specifically, if you go into investment, and this is, as I said, it's a program of the future. So investment into next generation. We have the core, what is to be called recovery, is not the immediate rescue response, but it's the more long-term recoveries response. And part of it under this program should be resilient. I'm not going to go into the definition of resilience, not very easy, but just to make sure it is it will consider elements beyond greenness, and these programs were delivered to the European Commission. A special administrative entity was newly constructed called Recover, directly under the heading of Ursula von der Leyen, the presidency of the Commission. So all the plans of the 27 member states had to be delivered first to be evaluated by the Commission directly under the Recover program, or the Recover entity, and every grant that is allocated is allocated, so to speak, after it has been decided to fulfill all the Green Deal needs. For example, this the one that I mentioned before, and it should be framed within the general grant allocation schemes in Europe. And this grant, the distribution, so to speak, of European money among the member states is going to be updated every year. So it's a continuous process of monitoring program and deciding on the fair distribution between the member states of the EU, which is scored in terms and in that sense transparently monitored under the RRP scorecard. So that's basically the system, how it works. And as you may easily infer, the recovery program that we can observe are, so to speak, funding of the future. It is actually less than 100 million now in use out of this RRPs, whereas much more money had been spent by the member states earlier in terms of recovery. We had this future program in Germany, for example, on 130 billion, on 29 billion that is covered by the EU as part of it. And only the 29 billion were evaluated in Brussels. The rest were evaluated, so to speak, in Berlin. So with that being clear, we should be always very clear about what is to be evaluated and what are our measurements. Please, the next slide to be go. I need to go on faster. What we did, we are a member, also Ian Clark in this, who attends virtually to us. We are all member of the European Science and Technology Advisory Group of UNDRR. So we use the network of UNDRR to evaluate the programs through a paired process. So one from within the country and one from outside the country were about to evaluate the programs of the member states. And we used to evaluate the recovery program, not only the funding needs under the RRFs. I can't go through all the 27. I cannot even go through the 4 that I put it on the slide, but it may be just important to mention, as Alexander was with us, we started in 2020, so long before any idea was on the table that the Ukraine become a member of the EU, to also look into the Ukrainian program in detail to see would that match, so to speak, to what is needed if you become an EU member, or if you want to draw on this funding stream, which I said is going on for at least another 7 years. We evaluated under ecology, cohesion, and competitiveness framework that was introduced by the French to the program. I have to go quicker, so I just asked for the next slide, and this is what we found for the 3 cases from Europe and the Ukraine. We just found very different profiles on how the money is spent. For France, there was actually a stipulation by the government to have a fair share between cohesion and greenness and competitiveness. So definitely the program just fulfilled the criteria by definition. So that's, so to speak, our benchmark. And as we compared the other countries to France, we found some very different needs of the future generations in Europe. In Germany, for example, you see the greenness at core is much smaller, whereas we have some elements that are green, but at the same time dealing with future competitiveness, such as a 7 billion program on developing a hydrogen economy in Europe and the technology needed. So it's green, but at the same time, it's increasing our competitiveness into the future. So this, you see the fair green share and the dark green share, it sums up to some 30%. So roughly a little less in our estimation in this pairwise comparisons than it was stipulated. For Spain, there's some clear agreement to the goal, but definitely not for Ukraine, if we come to that purpose. Just an observation, this is on the medium part of recovery. If we only look at the program that were delivered to funding at the Recover organization, it was different. It was much larger. It was much greener, as you see, 42%. And you can easily imagine the critique that came up. What would you say as a student of this field, let's say, so green finance, if a company puts everything in a green basket, has a basket and share that into a green and a gray basket, put everything, the green balls, everything in one basket, the gray balls in another, and talks only about the green balls towards Europe, how would you call this? Definitely, some would call it greenwashing. That happens, let's say you report to the entity that pays you specifically on the green basket, whereas the gray basket is kept existing, but at the national basis. I will not call that greenwashing because it's not a diplomatic term and it's a highly politicized term, but we need some observation of the spending that is reported, okay, and that is kept within the nation. Over, next slide, go very fast now. Here's the finding, different organizations independently did the same exercise later on. We were the pioneers in that sense, Alexander and I. And the overall finding is mixed to by this organization. I won't deal with the detail. Next slide. This is actually the last one, the most pertinent one to decide. It's by Bruegel, and a consultancy in Brussels that is employed by the Commission, in fact. So it shows largely every country except for Slovenia meets the green goal and the digital goal, the quantified part of it. Next slide, because we are so much behind. Well, and that's what you find on the website on the scoreboard. So if you now would go to Ursula von der Leyen and ask her, how are we doing? She would just say, we are doing good. We are fully on track. Next slide, please. Are we fully on track? Yes, to some extent, yes. And it shows how a well designed institution and a monitoring program could work out. What we did, Alexander and I, we compared this to other evaluations within Europe and outside Europe. There is a global recovery observatory in Oxford, which is also under the heading of UNDP. So it's outside. It has a much larger framework considering, for example, rescue elements. There is all right, just say, well, we can't go on this. So I just wrap up what I had to say. Next slide, please. It's about conclusions. So significantly, we delivered to the green and resilience. That means digital recovery, especially if you compare it to previous crises, we do better. We didn't do good, but we did do better. The targets are achieved, but only achieved in the reported RRPs, less so in the national recovery programs. We also looked into the share that was devoted to nature-based solutions. I cannot explain equally difficult term as resilient, but really needed. So sort of adaptation. It was in all programs less than 3% in the overall equally too. So we have a clear mitigation bias, this, as we have also experienced in these negotiations, to be corrected. Here are the recommendations. Oh, next slide, please. We need clear definitions. What is recovery? This is an undefined term in terms of monitoring economically. We need clear elements to account for this. We need sort of a resilience taxonomy. We have a taxonomy for mitigation and adaptation developed in Europe, but that needs to be extended towards recovery programs to be useful for monitoring. We need accountability. We have many unaccounted spending on rescue and recovery currently not considered in the monitoring of the EU funding. And we like to see that not just being top down, but also complemented by bottom up processes. The cities should be stronger involved than they were. They were at the front of fighting COVID, but they didn't, it is not assured that the money really goes to the city level. And we need transparency through independent evaluation. Thank you. This was a forthright to the program, hopefully useful to stimulate outlooks and comments, of course. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you much, Raymond. Thank you for such deep presentation and our panel. Yeah, you mentioned such important things like renewable energy, digitalization, and green finance. I suggest that we move to our Ukrainian and state government representatives to talk about this, and let's speak to those who are online from Ukraine because of a connection may happen some issues. So, but before that, I would like to welcome also Olga Yukhimchuk. She is the head of carbon pricing at Ministry of Environment, Protection and Natural Resources of Ukraine. So, Olga, welcome to our panel. Maybe I will stand and you can take my place. But I would invite Olena Lenska from State Agency of Energy Efficiency and Saving of Ukraine to speak about the instrument the agency has been developing together with UNDP. Thank you, Olena. And dear colleagues, let's stick to 10 minutes presentations and speeches because we have many speakers actually. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I see my presentation, please? My colleagues help me. It's not the... It's not my screen. Please share my presentation. It's some wrong with screen, but never mind. I'm start. I'm glad to welcome all of you to this conference today. Ukraine has always committed to low carbon development. In 2021, the government approved the updated national contribution of Ukraine to the Paris Agreement. CO2 emissions should be reduced by 65% by 2030. The use of renewables energy is one of the important directions of decarbonization of the economy. Considering the huge potential of renewable energy, Ukraine can become a green energy hub for Europe. In EU countries, guarantee of origin is the only instrument that confirms the origin of energy. Next slide, please. Not the previous slide. Yes. In EU countries, no. The second slide, please. That is why, as part of the implementation of the fourth energy package, we are working on creation of effective mechanism of guarantee of origin, which will be recognized not only by Ukraine, but also by the European Union. RED II introduced a strict requirement for recognition by the European Union of GEOs, but the third country. Undoubtedly, this is setting a challenge for Ukraine, which we have to overcome. Next slide. Over the past 8 years, more than 9 gigawatts of renewable energy capacities were built in Ukraine, in which more than 9 billion euros were invested. But today, Russia is trying to destroy the energy sector of Ukraine. Unfortunately, the best solar and wind resources are located in the areas of active war conflict. And today, almost 90 of wind and 30 of solar capacities are stopped or damaged. This reduces the production of electricity from renewable sources. In the second quarter of this year, the production of electricity reduced by 23% compared to the same period on 2021. However, Ukraine's direction on energy transformation is unchanged, and increase in renewable energy capacity is a part of the country's recovery. Next slide. Therefore, we are not changing the pre-war goal set by the National Economic Strategy to achieve 25% of renewable electricity production in 2030. The draft of the National Renewable Energy Action Plan until 2030, which is being prepared for submission of the government, provides for doubling the production of electricity from renewables. For this, we need to increase RES capacity up to 24 gigawatt in 2030. Taking into account the joining of NCE and the potential of renewable energy in Ukraine, we can not only provide our own needs, but also be a reliable supplier of green electricity confirmed by a guarantee of origin to EU countries. Next slide. Another no less ambitious direction of decarbonization is to biomethane. The REPowerEU plan set a goal of producing 35 billion cubic meter of biomethane per year by 2030. The European Commission has already planned the EU-Ukraine partnership on renewable gases. In 2030, the total production of biomethane in Ukraine may reach 1 billion cubic meter per year. And half of this volume can be exported to the EU. Again, according to the European directives, biomethane production must be supported by guarantees of origin. Next slide. The European market for guarantee of origin has been growing rapidly since 2012, both in terms of volume. By 23% per year and value. The introduction of guarantees of origin has certain incentives for all sectors of Ukraine. For the state, it is decarbonization of the economy and fulfillment of international obligation. For producers, a market tool for stimulating investment in RES project and additional competitive advantages when exporting green energy to the EU. And for consumers, it's of course reduction of the consequences of the introduction of CBAM during the export of goods to the EU and reduction of environmental taxes. Ukraine has launched the process of implementation the EU directives on the GEOs introduction into national legislation. Today, there are regulations in force which authorize the state agency on energy efficiency and energy saving to issue guarantees of origin for electricity from renewable sources and biomethane. Next slide, we are working on improving the legislation. I would like to thank UNDP for supporting us in this process. Our goal is to create a model functioning mechanism for GEOs for all types of energy in the basis of the Universal Electronic Platform of geo registers, taking into account modern information technologies and, of course, the new requirements. At the first stage, such a platform will unite 3 registers: biomethane, electricity from RES, and electricity produced from high-efficiency cogeneration. Later, other registers will be added to this platform, in particular GEOs for green hydrogen and other types of energy. Therefore, despite the difficulties because of martial law in Ukraine and the energy crisis, we confidently follow the path of green recovery and see ourselves as a promising partner of the European Union on the path of decarbonization. Thank you for attention.
Thank you, Elena. Thank you much. Indeed, this instrument is new one, and also for Ukraine, for Europe as well, is like among the new instruments. That's why it's really good that we are not too much behind of Europe in this case. We are moving forward and we are trying to help the agency to proceed with this instrument. Dear colleagues, I also would like to let speak Olga Yukhimchuk from Ministry of Environment, because that's what Elena began decarbonization. Ministry of Environment does as well much in this regard. Olga, please.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay, I'll try to speak up. First of all, apologies for being late. The schedules clash and that's really complicated here. But it's my big pleasure to be at this panel, and thank you to UNDP for inviting. We have already started our joint path towards the implementation of an agreement on projects, so it is a big pleasure to be here for me. What I think is important on behalf of the government to talk about here today is that we know all that our country is now going through one of the hardest periods in centuries. And we truly believe that this is at the very earliest possible will end, and we will be at the stage when we recover our country and we are moving forward and making it better than ever before. And one of the key responsibilities for our ministry as a Ministry of Environmental Protection and Natural Resources is to make sure that this recovery is green. That is our key task for the coming years, and this is all our efforts are addressed to. And so what we started already is that we had signed an agreement with Switzerland, between Ukraine and Switzerland, on implementation of Article 6. That's a bilateral agreement between two governments that has built a big basis for numerous projects, green projects in Ukraine. And from my point of view, I think this agreement is very, very good because it gives a big scope. It builds the basis, but it's technology neutral, it's scope neutral. It doesn't say particular projects. It doesn't define any limitations. So it's a very broad basis that can serve for us as an instrument to push the business and try find really good greening projects that would bring benefit to our country. The implementation agreement still needs to be operationalized. There's a lot of work to be done on our behalf, particularly as the government. We need to build a framework, legislative framework, which is currently not there in place. We do have like the law on ratification of the Paris Agreement and the MRV system running in a slow mode because of the situation, but it's still up and running. So our task for now in the coming month is to develop the key framework, legal framework that would help us to operationalize the Article 6. And we're doing it with the support of the UNDP, which is very helpful for us. We have started jointly the work on assessment of the needs that we have in Ukraine. So what are the gaps? What is missing? What is there? Well, we definitely know that legal framework is missing, but what kind of technological matters, what institutional matters are missing? So what is it that we have to implement to make sure that this all works? And that the business and the municipalities and everyone interested can submit projects under this agreement and make the reduction of CO2. So this is what we're doing now. What else I think I was important about to say, and I keep forgetting because it's a little bit of chaos here. Yeah, I believe this is so far. If you have any
Olga, thank you. I think I would also only mention that what we had at COP27 here, that Japan also would not mind to sign a similar agreement with Ukraine. So that seems to be great potential in terms of decarbonization and finance, new finance for Ukrainian businesses to be like pilots for further carbon markets development as well. So
definitely, we're not gonna stop at one agreement. We're doing bilateral negotiations with a number of countries to further get more agreements and to further involve more countries in our work, and particularly under Article 6. Yes, we did talk to Japan on that as well. And there are a number of other countries that we see who could be potential partners under Article 6. So I believe that would all work good.
thank you once again, colleagues. Yeah, let's speak a bit about digitalization. What we've been also trying to support and doing, and I would let speak Viktor Small, Deputy Head of State Forestry Agency. 1 second. Now we're going to have a presentation.
Hello, everyone.
1 second.
Hello, everyone. It's an honor for me to be here, and I'm really happy that I have this opportunity to show my presentation and to share with you our vision of sustainable development of Ukrainian forest industry and our steps in digitalization as well. Next slide, please. So to make, before talking about the main part of presentation, I want to make a step back to the year 2021. This year was the very best year for Ukrainian forest industry since its independence. I will underline a couple of major digits for you to understand what we did. And if we are talking about the area of forest fires, for 1 year, we decreased the area of forest fires in 40 times, not in 40% minus, but in 40 times. Historically, we had around 10,000 hectares of fire forest. And in 2021, it was less than 300 hectares. It became possible because of the beginning of using of space technologies, of the remote detecting of forest fires from the space, and of course, because of the development of terrestrial digital networks on land. Also, we have started the forest recovery program, the ambitious one of the President Zelensky, that's called Grid Country, and we managed to plant plus 60 million trees. I will remind you that this program is about making 1 billion trees for 3 years and about increasing the area of Ukrainian forests in plus 1 million hectares in 10 years. For now, we are making 23% of the plan. Besides that, we have made plus 57% for industry sale revenue. And I want to underline and draw attention that it became possible with the same cutting volume. We didn't start it to cut more. We just started to be more efficient and productive. We have made plus 48% in taxes, and concerning the net profit of enterprises, we made it almost in 4 times bigger than the previous years. Next slide, please. Besides that, we have made the state strategy for forest industry until the year 2035. We have optimized the number of state enterprises and reduced it from the quantity of 307 into 164. Also, we have started the digital transformation of the industry, and we started the national forest inventory. Next slide, please. Things changed dramatically on the 24th of February, and it changed and affected all sides of Ukrainian life. And of course, the war came, Russia brought war to Ukrainian forests as well. Next slide, please. Now, every 7th employee of Ukrainian forest industry is the member of military forces of Ukraine. We have mobilized more than 1,000 vehicles to the frontier line. In the sense of the destroyment, we have destroyed real estate for more than $30 million. We have the damages and destroyed equipment for more than $10 million. And the damage for ecosystem is equivalent to almost $400 million. Next slide, please. For you to understand how war affected the forests of Ukraine, I have to share this digit that Ukrainian forest land is 10.4 million hectares, and 30% of this territory were occupied and were affected by the war. Next slide, please. From the beginning of war, we have these digits. It was 3 million hectares of Ukrainian forests that were occupied, and we have already deoccupied 2.45 million hectares. And under occupation, it's 450,000 hectares. It doesn't mean that we can maintain the occupied area, because the huge problem is about the mining of this territory. And without the cooperation with international partners, it can take us for decades to finish the demining of this territory. For you to understand the speed of demining, I can tell you the number of Kharkiv region, for instance. We have 75,000 hectares in Kharkiv region that are mined, and it takes us a week to demine 10 hectares, 10 of 75,000. So you can easily count that we are making demining of 40 hectares per 1 month. Next slide, please. On these pictures, you can see how the Russian world looks like, what they brought to our country. Next slide, please. A couple of pictures of the damaged real estate and equipment. Next slide, please. And a couple of pictures before and after. These pictures were made from the very same point. And on the top, it was before the 24th of February. And on the bottom part, it's how it looks nowadays. Next slide, please. The huge problem we are facing now is about mines and forest fires, and all our modern technologies in sense of detecting the forest fires are absolutely useless now, because we are detecting them and can do nothing about them. We can only detect that they're going on, increasing and stuff like that. Second major problem is property and equipment destruction. And third one is extremely high demand for firewoods and the military needs. Here I need to mention that from the very first day of this war, Ukrainian state forest industry was helping for our military forces, and we are doing that every day. And with the lack of our vehicles, minus 1,000 vehicles, we have to do the same job what we did before, and we have to make the logistics task for our military forces as well. Next slide, please. The war is going on. We are not hesitating. We will get the victory. And here on this slide, I want to show you the main directions of digitalization. And I've made 3 groups for you to for your better understanding what is going on. First group is about planting and growing of the forest. Here we talk about the creation of a single unique digital forest management system. Of course, the core of the system is the GIS technologies, Geographical Information System. And the core of this system is the cartographical system with their multi-layer data storage on it. And if we create this system, we are talking about step-by-step digitalization of all the processes that connect with the planting and growing of the forest. And we are talking about making possible to have the electronic history of specific forest area. It will make us see what we done in the past, what kind of activities took place in the very specific area of the forest, and it will show us the current state, and of course it will make us able to make the prognostication of all the activities we can do with the forest. Talking about this core system of cartography information, we are talking about multi-storage levels of information. And of course, we're talking about LiDAR scanning data. We're talking about modern and fresh, up-to-date pictures from the satellites. And this one single system will be working through the whole country. Second part is the protection of the forests. And I mentioned about the system of with the help of satellites from the space, but as well we are working on the terrestrial digital networks. The main part of this network is IP camera, and we're creating local networks for the detection of fires. We want to create and cover the whole territory of our country and of our forest. We want to cover that with these digital networks. So the third, but last but not the least part is harvesting and control. Here, the main idea is creating the digital chain of custody. And the instruments we have already developed are the big part of that. And we have already developed the electronic woodcutting permit that will be detecting all the volume that is coming to the internal market. Every extra volume that is not in this system of electronic wood permit, woodcutting permission will be considered as illegal. At the last place of this chain is the certificate of origin. This is also the electronic system that is being made right now. We think that it will be ready by the February, March of next year, and it will connect the starting volume that is getting to the internal market with the external volumes that are leaving Ukraine and go abroad. These two systems will be connected, and we will see the connections between starting volume and the external certificates of origin that are leaving our country. Our next step, when we are done with the woodcutting permission system and the certificate of origin, when we combine them together, our third step will be creating of medium part between these two systems, and it will be the system of internal declaration of all the actions that the member of the market is doing with his volume. It will be the system, and it will look like online banking actually, because every official member of the market will see the balances on his online account. And as soon as he is doing something with his volumes, whether he's selling or whether he's producing something, he will be making the transactions in this online system, and he will be choosing the other member of the market who now is the new owner of that volume. So by the end of the day, we will be controlling, and we already have that instrument, the starting volume of the wood. We will have the understanding of how much of this internal wood is now on the balance of every single member of the market. And at the end of the day, we will understand how it will be going outside. So it will be unique system with a fully transparency and clearness in the system. All this is absolutely necessary to make the further step for the further development. Next slide, please. And of course, the next step will be the green financing and the system of carbon certificates. Ukrainian State Forest Industry and Agency, I believe it will become one of the major players on this market. And if we are talking about two main groups of members of the market who can generate green points on their accounts, we are talking about the companies that can decrease the emission, or whether they can increase the absorption. And of course, Ukrainian State Forest Agency belongs to second group. We are to increase the absorption of carbon dioxide. I'm welcoming you to all kind of cooperation. I want to share with you this presentation, and please make next slide. Next slide, please. Please, you're welcome to scan this QR code, and you will be leaded to the online version of this presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Victor. Yeah, I think your presentation very clearly describes when during what time still forest governance can improve very significantly. When on the one hand, we have demining process, on the other hand, we are talking about digital accounting and even creation of carbon credits. That's really very perspective start. Colleagues, our next presenter will be online online, and I would like to pass my the microphone actually virtually to Andrei Remizov, the head of entrepreneurship and export promotion office of Ukraine. And Andrei, yeah, we know well about your business DIA product, which has become well known not only in Ukraine. So please share with us your success and your intentions as well. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Alexander. Hello, dear colleagues, dear partners. It's a honor to be here with you. And today I want to show our experience and the idea which we developed together with UNDP and our Entrepreneurship and Export Promotion Office, together with the Ministry of Digital Transformation, launched and developed a special national project for SME and export development, DIA business. And DIA is an acronym which means the state and me. And this is the brand of digital state, digital Ukraine. Yeah, and we have the separate project DIA business for potential and existing entrepreneurs. And in the framework of this project, we create a lot of useful services, for example, free online consultations, some marketplaces of financial opportunities. We have an impact investment platform and a separate section about sustainable goals. Sustainable development goals, and a lot of useful content about successful stories and news for business about opportunities in Ukraine from government, from international partners. And we have a lot of services, more than 20 approximately, in digital format for some tasks. And also we have a special offline centers for SME development, DIA business in Ukrainian regions. We have 12 physical places for SMEs, and they can go to these centers and get free offline consultations and use some training programs about some specific topics, for example, how to pay taxes, how to make digital strategy, or how to improve sales or marketing strategy, and other topics. And we understand that for Ukrainian SMEs, it's very important to attract some investments and some financing from international partners, from private or international investment funds and international banks. And we understand that for SMEs also very important to know how to do it, and to know what is the main ways for doing it. And in this way we understand that we have to share and train Ukrainian SMEs in direction of ESG and sustainable doing business. Yeah, and under this topic, we create together with UNDP the special tool, ESG readiness IT tool for farmers and agribusiness. It's like a guidance. And what is a ESG? ESG is environmental, social, and governance risk. And we want to share this
Andrei, we cannot hear you somehow.
Yeah, do you hear me now?
No, yeah, no, it's better.
Yeah, okay, sorry. Yes, and we want to share this practice for Ukrainian SME, and we want to popularize this topic because it's very important for attracting financing and some investments. Yeah, and this practice actively use EU SMEs and SMEs in other countries. Yeah, and this is the way for companies to identify some major assets and manage and report such risks. And we want to show for SMEs how does it work, and we will create the special web page on the DIA business platform with these materials and materials about ESG. And we will include some training materials, and also we will develop the special digital IT self-assessment, which will include more than 96 questions about ESG. And this will include information about how about employment, about sustainable procurement, gender balance, greenhouse gas emissions, waste generation, and other topics. And SMEs will pass some special self-assessment digital test, and after that they will get free scoring and free and information about gaps on their business in ESG direction. Yeah, and they will also get some recommendations how to improve their business models and how to implement ESG in their own business. Yeah, and now we are on final stage in the development of this special digital tool, and we will present it in December. And I want to thank the UNDP project and our partners for this development. And I think that we will help Ukrainian SMEs to attract money from international partners and understand how to do business, taking into account our best practices, ESG, and sustainable development goals. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrei. Indeed, yeah, we spent almost 1 year, I mean, UNDP and the office to develop this tool, and we hope to present this completely and in a good shape in December of this year. And logically, when we talk about ESG, I would like to give words to Yulia Bereshenko, Astart Agro Holding, which is a public company and is ESG driven as well, I understand. Yulia, please.
Thank you, Alexander. It's a pleasure to represent the Ukrainian agriculture at this event. The role of agriculture in Ukraine cannot be underestimated. Just give you a view of our company. It is one of the top producers of grain and oil seeds, over 1 million tons per year. We process the crops that we produce, such as sugar beet into sugar, up to 500,000 tons. Before the war, we crush soybeans into the mill and oil, which is used by the livestock and poultry producers in Ukraine and abroad. And we have huge dairy farming operations with 23,000 cows producing 100,000 tons of milk. The size of our company is representative of the agriculture in Ukraine. It is the core industry which, even before the war, generated 40% of hard currency proceeds for the economy. Now, when the economy is down because of the military invasion by Russia, it took an additional hit by having the land occupied in the north and in the east. But the agriculture is now still generating 60% of the hard currency proceeds for Ukraine. Why it is important to think about green recovery and the role of Ukrainian agriculture in this process? For the same reason as my colleague explained before, agriculture can be a carbon sink. It doesn't take the earth to turn from emitting emissions, and 1/3 of the global greenhouse emissions associated with agriculture and food chain. But if we change how we produce food, if we employ methods of regenerative agriculture, we can turn agriculture into a carbon sink. Just think about it. Half of Ukrainian land is farmland, which is growing crops, and half of all Ukrainian land can become a carbon sink. If we look at the next slide, just wanted to give an overview of our experience with sustainability development. The company joined United Nations Global Compact many, many years ago. As a public company, we have additional obligations, and we report many of our sustainability data to our stakeholders, to our investors, to our creditors, to the local communities. But also, since Paris Agreement, we are thinking about decarbonization. We started with our downstream operations. Our sugar mills have been retrofitted from burning coal to gas. Obviously, now gas is a problem. It is still a fossil fuel, and we are thinking about the alternatives. And we need funds to turn into a biomass. But we also have one of the largest projects we've done recently was a biogas facility, which is burning the residue from sugar beet processing into biogas. And this biogas is feeding into our soybean crushing and into our sugar mill. But decarbonization is not possible without decarbonizing the primary agriculture activities, which is on the ground. Soil is a carbon sink, and the more carbon dioxide we leave in the ground, the more fertile soil is, it is healthier, and it will produce more for other generations. And this is why last year we joined a pilot project with Syngenta to decarbonize on 30,000 hectares of our land by reduced tillage, by using cover crops, by using nitrogen fertilizer, nitrogen inhibitors, and all other methods which are called regenerative agriculture. These kind of efforts require financing. These kind of efforts require Ukrainian farmers to switch to precision farming and to replace their equipment, to go from full tillage to reduced tillage to no-till, and that is a lot of capex. So we are looking for partners. We're looking for partners among our suppliers and off-takers, among our creditors who are able to promote our efforts and help us to go into regenerative agriculture in our activities. The next slide. Obviously, at the times of war, we cannot do little when so many people are suffering. 17 million people were displaced. 7 million people had to leave the country, but 10 million people are displaced internally. And we set up a humanitarian project together with other business partners to help those who live now near our operations, to help our army, and to help communities to restore peaceful lives after the war. If you would like to join our project as a partner, please also scan our QR code, and we will be more than happy to work with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you much, Julia. Indeed impressive efforts you made. And I understand even that you follow ESG and you apply ESG practices. I understand that during the wartime that also helped you to include those programs. Maybe that's because of ESG, partially at least.
Yes, absolutely. We already had a framework, and as a large-scale company, the framework could cover a lot of people, and it allowed us to launch the project and to start distributing food rations, medicines, and other humanitarian supplies within weeks of starting the war. So I think we had additional responsibility, and we were probably ahead of some of the international rescue organizations here.
Thank you, Julia. Okay, colleagues, yeah, I think after great introduction by Raymond about green recovery, and then following presentations of businesses and state officials, it's very important to summarize something. And we still have two speakers. And online we have Jan Clark. I think he's still online. Jan, are you here?
Yes, sure. I'm still here. Yeah, sure.
Yes, Jan. Yeah, could you please share your thoughts, your observations after all today presentations, and maybe, of course, you have your own thoughts as well.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody, and greetings from Brussels. Just to say that I am I'm a former official of the European Union. I no longer work for the European Commission. I'm a retired official, but I am, together with Raymond, part of the European Science and Technology Advisory Group of UNDRR. And I've listened with great interest to the presentations today, and I think I certainly have learned a lot about the enormous progress that has been made in Ukraine towards energy efficiency and general improvement in relation to climate. But what I would perhaps like to share with you just is a few lessons that perhaps we've learned across Europe in trying to both address climate change and also disaster risk reduction, and perhaps some things which could help Ukraine as it goes forward. I mean, I have perhaps four very brief points to make. Firstly, it seems clear that strengthening governance is a vital challenge, and certainly something which European countries have faced. And this covers both making sure that science and policy actually work together, that science is actually used. We often see that scientific reports remain on shelves, unused. One activity undertaken by the Joint Research Centre was to try and bring together science for disaster risk reduction to the general public to make this better available. And one thing that was found was that old science reports which had developed websites, after 3 or 4 years, these websites were totally dead, showing that actually the results from the science are not being used. So this is something which I think is important to bring together. Another issue that we find in Europe is that there are division between different ministries and lack of coordination. And one thing which UNDRR has been pushing for a long time is better coordination between climate adaptation, but climate policy in general, and also disaster risk reduction. And there are a lot of initiatives been undertaken there, but one personal experience that I had when I worked for the EU was we tried to bring together those working on climate adaptation and those working on disaster risk reduction from EU member states in a meeting, which was very successful. But for many of the people attending from these different ministries in the same country, it was the first time they had ever met. So this is an example showing that there has been a general lack of coordination, and something which we need to build on. I think secondly, the whole question of monitoring and review mechanisms is particularly important. Certainly as we see the vast sums of finance, which Raymond mentioned, being put in place, it's vital that strong review mechanisms are put in place. And there are some interesting examples which the EU has set up. There's something called the Structural Support Reform Program, which provides technical assistance for member states to support implementing the Green Deal. So, for example, in Hungary, there has been a whole monitoring mechanism established to help evaluate their climate policy measures, and also to bring climate adaptation into environmental impact assessments. Secondly, in the case of Belgium has been trying to move transport for freight transport from road to rail to avoid congestion and again to help improve the environment. And so there's been a whole process developed to support the Antwerp Port Authority to undertake this. And then in the Netherlands, for example, a data management tool which has been established to help improve nature restoration and preservation. These are just some examples of schemes which are in place, which I think perhaps Ukraine could look at, could be particularly interesting to think about establishing such a scheme in Ukraine. I think, thirdly, I would imagine that the renovation of buildings, particularly from an energy efficiency point of view, is going to be particularly important in Ukraine. Certainly, it is a key issue in the EU. For example, in Hungary, buildings consume 40% of energy, and a vast proportion of the energy stock was built before 1980. And Hungary estimates that 70 to 90% of the buildings will need to be renovated to achieve climate targets. And again, there is technical assistance been provided from the EU to help establish a program for this energy efficiency. And it's interesting here in Belgium, the country I live in, Belgium is planning to spend about 40% of its Green Deal assistance on renovation of buildings, particularly public school buildings built in the 70s and 80s, which need renovation. It's interesting here that Belgium is combining its approach to energy efficiency together with digitalization of the school system. So again, that's trying to bring together the two arms of the Green Deal system. So that again is perhaps interesting for Ukraine to look at. And finally, just to mention on major infrastructure, the EU has had for a long time what's known as the Cohesion Fund, which supports the least well-off member states to develop transport and environmental infrastructure. And around 40% of this the new phase of this Cohesion Fund should be spent on climate actions. And I think this would also be particularly interesting for Ukraine to look at for the future, particularly for recovery and the way in which this program has been implemented. So just very briefly, those just 4 areas which I think perhaps are worth looking at from the Ukraine side, based on EU experience.
Thank you much, Jan. Yeah, indeed, EU Green Deal produced a lot of initiatives within EU which have influence and impact on Ukraine, and we within our UNDP Green Recovery project actually developed a lot of such products and such ways towards those initiatives, and that's what we need to begin with this, of course. And also I would like to give the word to Richard to make your own observation about our panel, and maybe you have your own thoughts as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And it's a great honor for me to be here. And I would like to congratulate Ukraine and UNDP for having this pavilion. And, whereas the first priority and the second and third priority of Ukraine is to defeat Russia, I think it's really impressive also to hear what we've heard during this session in terms of the plans and the progress already made towards a green transition, towards developing green energy resources. We've heard about forestry. We've heard about the role of the private sector and SMEs, and it's incredibly encouraging to see what is indeed happening, both in terms of the own initiative, but also in collaboration with other countries. We heard about the contracts under Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. So it's amazing that so much is happening, and it is putting, I think, Ukraine on an incredibly good and productive track towards the reconstruction and rebuilding of Ukraine once it has won the war. I would like to add one component to the discussion. We've talked a lot about green energy and the green transition and how that contributes to decarbonization. But of course, one of the other components of climate action is adaptation. The European Commission released its EU adaptation strategy in February last year. And an important element of that is not only to look at the adaptation and resilience building within Europe, but also the relationship between Europe and the rest of the world, because there is an increasing awareness that what happens elsewhere might affect Europe and vice versa. And we've seen that also with the droughts, for example, of the past summer, which then coincided with the war in Ukraine, leading to food insecurity in many parts of the world. And I could imagine that there are two ways in which Ukraine, beyond, of course, also looking at its domestic adaptation priorities, could also look at becoming part of an international alliance, if you like, both within Europe and globally, to strengthen not only the resilience of Ukraine, but systemic resilience worldwide. And I think the first option would be to seek with DG Klima and others within the European Commission to collaborate or perhaps even join the mission on adaptation work that is taking place at the moment. Europe has, in part in response to the EU adaptation strategy, set up a large program that recognizes that adaptation is no longer just a local priority that needs to be done by individual sectors and communities, but that it requires regional collaboration. Europe has been sort of divided into many different regions, including neighboring countries of Ukraine. And I could imagine that certainly the parts of Ukraine that neighbor Poland and Hungary and Romania will be well placed to join and benefit from taking part in mission adaptation activities. The second activity is a global one, and it recognizes that adaptation is a global challenge, just like it says in the Paris Agreement, and that what happens in one part of the world might have an effect, a cascading effect on many different other parts of the world. We've seen that with COVID and the coronavirus, which easily crosses borders once it emerges in one place, but the same mechanism could also take place with climate risk. Let me give you one example, which is not related to Ukraine, but sort of to illustrate why adaptation is indeed a global challenge. And there are equivalents to the present time. The food crisis of 2008, 2009 was caused by a number of factors that were compounding, but one element was drought in South and Southeast Asia, which created difficulties with rice production. There were, in anticipation of reducing rice yields, countries like India and Thailand restricted or even banned the export of rice. It had a strong effect on the price of rice on the global markets, in the same way that we are now seeing with wheat. But rice even stronger because it's a thinner market and the volatility is even higher. And that led to price shocks, even triple the price of rice, that affected many rice importing countries, particularly West Africa. And colleagues of mine have done research in Senegal, for example, and found that there was a direct connection between political instability and food riots that took place in Senegal in 2008 with the export ban. So the response, the adaptation response of countries in South and Southeast Asia. In response to these kind of mechanisms, the recognition that what happens in one part of the world can affect other countries, a group of think tanks and other partners have set up what is called Adaptation Without Borders, which is now a growing global partnership. We have support from DG Klima, and there are various others who are also seeking to become involved. And I could imagine it would be very interesting for Ukraine and also for UNDP to look into possibilities of working with Adaptation Without Borders and see how the role of Ukraine and the geopolitical strategic position it has in, for example, food security, can benefit from being part of that partnership. I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much again for organizing this event and for inviting me to be on the panel.
Thank you much for great summary and ideas, Richard. Indeed, important, especially all this neighborhood involvement from EU to Ukraine in terms of adaptation is really worthwhile to think about and build up new programs actually about this. It seems to be. Dear colleagues, we came to an end, and perhaps just last thing, maybe let's maybe somebody would like to make some final remarks if there are some things. Maybe maybe Raymond, as you began, maybe you could say something.
Yeah, I like to. The first thing I would like to subsign, of course, to what Richard said, but I also want to congratulate to this pavilion. I think it's the first time, a real premiere, and I think it really helped to make visible both challenges you're facing under the war and keeping up the green spirit that came over very convincingly and loudly, and I heard it's something that's really going to be heard by a large audience of politicians and others. The second point is I always like to be an ambassador also for civil society and cities cooperation. Almost every big city in Germany has now a Ukrainian partner city, but there are forums that also give in some sense support for building peer networks of cities collaborating, and with the challenges ahead to which increasing heat where Richard was talking about is something that is really at the forefront, and we cannot forget it. It's in parallel to the war. This war of that we fight against nature, unfortunately, must be on our agenda in parallel all time, and this kind of collaboration of cities on a peer-to-peer level is something that I would also add to this as important. The cities are in fact those who are facing to respond as the first party. They are the first responders to everything we deal with here. So I like to add the component of not just bilateral cooperation that enabled this pavilion. Hope it will go on to the next conference, but also the civil society cooperation, which is quite strong. Actually, the city where I'm from, I may say, is Leipzig. You may not know it. It's just a small city, but it has the largest number of Ukrainian population within it since long. Of course, through the war, it increased, but there's a long-standing tradition of civil society and city cooperation. Over from here. If you want to add something.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay, please, could you please also make some final remarks if you wish?
Well, the final remark is, of course, please help Ukraine. And we need financial help most at the moment. We know what to do. We know how to, we have a roadmap. What we need is really financing.
Thank you. Yeah, okay, Victor.
Thank you for this event. I think you had a chance to have a quick glance on the effects of war that we have in Ukraine, and it was just another couple of pieces of information that you could hear. We believe in our victory. We keep working, and being alone in this process, as I said, it will take us for decades to compensate all the damages that we have. Only together with Europe, with the civilized world, we can make it faster. And I hope that we will be able to make the conclusions from all the situations with the war in Ukraine, not to make it happen, or try not to make it happen in future, because our history shows that after Second World War, the conclusions were made but nothing happened. Even 100 years haven't passed, and we have another war in Europe. It means that the system, the international organization, they have to work harder. They have to find the mistakes that made the things possible. So, but still, I believe that humanity is getting stronger, and after the end of this war, we will see a great changing of the world. And I believe that Ukraine, after this war, will become one of the biggest center in Eastern Europe, of course, with the partnership, with the support of our partners. And Russia is going to dark ages. And we have to understand that the processes that will be happening in Russia, they're going down. The worst thing that can happen, it can fall apart, having the nuclear weapon in all of its parts. So making Russia lose, we have to keep in mind that nuclear weapon, we don't know the capability of that weapon for now, but we have to keep that in our minds. Only total denuclearization of what we call Russia today can make us live in peace for next years. And I want to say that I think yesterday on the official website of Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, there appeared a document. And this document is collecting the signatures to make Russians not enter Ukraine for next 100 years. I think that 100 years may be not enough, but still to start with is going to be fine. So please support that document.
Thank you, Victor. The colleagues online, do you wish to make some final remarks? If you are still here. Okay, it seems to be they are not online anymore. Okay, dear colleagues, we finished our panel, but still, I think I also just 2 words say that I think our panel proved that Ukraine stays in action. We do a lot despite all those difficult times, and I think we will succeed very soon. Thank you very much. Oh, let's make a picture.